Okay, so hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. My name's Isobel and I'm the Principal Ecologist at Surrey Wildlife Trust. And if you haven't heard about me before, I've been around for well over 20 years and I have been picking up lots of botanical hints and tips in that time. I do a lot of the consultancy work, so that means working for developers, but also local landowners, giving them advice on management. So it's a little bit of everything, but principally I do a lot of the botanical work. But I also get involved in bat work as well as newt work, reptiles, everything else that's involved in the consultancy. But I'm also part of the Surrey Botanical Society. I'm also affiliated with Hampshire Flora Group, Elton Natural History Society and the London Natural History Society, as well as other groups as well. So it's my passion, it's what I love doing. And I hope that you do too, which is why you're here. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about this place here, and it's generally going to be a sort of lots of wildflowers that I'm going to explain about what they are, what their names are, why they are called what they are, how to identify them. So you can take as much away as you like. You can just have a look at the nice pretty flowers, or you can be inspired to then go out and do some of your own recording as well. So this is a picture of Norbury Park. So this is where I went to yesterday. It's one of the Surrey Wildlife Trust reserves, and it's a chalk grassland and woodland, and we were in the grassland yesterday. So this is obviously, you can see this lovely path going through with some tall grasses either side. So this is one of the first plants that we came across, and this is called wild mignonette. So the one on the left you can see is a little bit further back, so you can see the whole plant. It was about 30 to 40 centimetres. And then the other picture there is the flower itself. It's quite a big bushy flower and quite inconspicuous in a way colour. It's part of that sort of green hue of colours, but actually it sort of starts flowering from the bottom and it sort of flowers all the way up to the top, and it's rather beautiful. I was going to say actually also that if you are interested in identifying plants, there are lots and lots of different books out there. So there are things like Dominic Price, he's got a lovely book on grasses. There's also a Collins field book guide. That's a really good one that has grasses as well as flowers in there, just in case you're interested. But there are lots of other ones as well. So for example, this one here, that one has some really good illustrations. And then there's the normal one that people have seen or heard before, and that's called the Wildflower Guide, and it's by Dr. Francis Rose, or it was originally anyway. Let's put those to one side. So one of the next flowers that we came across was this little teeny tiny one. Now, of course, the flower and the plant look quite big there, but it's tiny. That's a really small flower, probably about 5 millimeters across, maybe even smaller. And these little leaves that go either side of the stem, they're really small and tiny. And this is something that is called fairy flax. It has other names. It's also called purging flax. And the reason why it's called purging flax is because if you eat a few of the little seeds, it actually can make you vomit, hence purging. You purge yourself. And there was one guy who I know, or know of anyway, who had just a couple of these seeds, and it had the desired reaction. But I wouldn't suggest you do anything like that at all, because you just never know exactly what's going to happen. But that's the sort of the old name for it. So there's over here is the flower itself. You can really see those beautiful veins going up through the flower, and these beautiful little perfect little white petals either side. And as I said, it's very small, and it needs quite a lot of bare ground in order to germinate. So you quite often find it on the edge of paths. You can find it sort of trailing through taller vegetation as well, but it's very difficult to see. But when you start seeing it, you actually start seeing quite a lot of it. You just have to hone in and have a look and get your eye in. So this one is a lovely creeping cinquefoil here. And this creeping cinquefoil has a little notch at the top of its petal up here. And although it's not necessarily strictly a calcareous grassland species, you do find it in the calcareous grassland as well as neutral grassland. And it has these beautiful five petals, and you can just about see here and here the palmate leaves of the creeping cinquefoil. So it has these 5 leaflets that almost look like fingers, like digits, and that's a really good way of being able to identify it. So you can often identify it without the flowers being present. In fact, in some ways it's actually easier, because the flowers, these yellow flowers, are very similar to a lot of the other yellow flowers that are out and about at the moment, like silverweed, buttercups, and there's another one that I'll show you later, which is called common rock rose. And they all have these 4 or 5 yellow petals, so they can actually be quite tricky, but it's down to the other vegetative ID that you're supposed to be looking out for, leaves and stems and hairs and things like that. So this one here is a really common one again, but you find it quite a lot on chalk grassland and neutral grassland as well. And this one you probably recognise, it's plantain. But what's really nice about this one is that you have the leaves, sort of, it's a bit blurred in the background, but they're long, thin, linear leaves. And you often see those without the flower. But of course, at this time of year, if it has been allowed to grow, it hasn't been mown, it will be in flower. And you can see this beautiful ring of flowers. So these are the dead ones. And then these are the active ones. These are ones that are out and open at the moment. And then these are the ones that will be open later on in the next few weeks. And it's one of those things where it's a very common plant. You find it probably in your garden, in your lawn, but no one ever really looks at it. And I really strongly suggest that you start looking at just ordinary flowers, even if a flower that you don't know what it is, but just take the time to have a look at its beauty, because common plants can be extremely beautiful as well. For example, Taraxacum, which is dandelion. Now, everyone hates a dandelion because it gets into their lawns, makes a mess, no one likes it. They want to either spot kill it or to dig it out. But actually, if a dandelion was rare, then people would absolutely love it. They would suddenly start taking an interest in it. And I'll show you the next photograph, which has a dandelion-like flower in it over here. This is actually one of the Leontodons. So it looks like a dandelion. The difference with this one is that it has little, I think you can probably just about see the hairs, and they on the leaf, they are forked. So they look like Y-shaped leaves, hairs, sorry. And again, it's a dandelion-like flower, so people sort of can dismiss them. But you more often than not will find, when you're looking down into the flower itself, you'll find a beetle in there, or a small hoverfly, or a moth visiting. And they're extremely important for the pollinators, and shouldn't be dismissed, although I agree that they can be quite difficult to identify. But of course, here I did promise an orchid, and we've got a little orchid here. It's a bit blurry on this photograph, but I will show you some more which aren't quite so blurry. These are photographs, I might add, that I took yesterday on my iPhone, so I'm not the best of photographers, so I do apologise if they're slightly out of focus. This little one here, right in the foreground, is another beautiful flower, and it's actually in the dock family. You might be able to recognise that. So it has this little group of flowers with the seed as well in there, and this one is called common sorrel. So this one has beautiful sort of shield-shaped leaves with a little pointy bit sticking out, and they can actually be used in salads. They have the Latin name is Rumex acetosa, and it means bitter or vinegary. And so that's a species that can be put into your salads. And there's also a smaller one. These ones that we were seeing yesterday were anything between, I don't know, 20 centimetres right up to 40 or 50 centimetres. They can be quite tall at this time of year, and particularly now because they're flowering. There is another one, but you would find it on acid grassland or heathland, and it's called sheep's sorrel, and it tends to be a lot smaller, and the leaf sort of comes down into like a little cinch point, and then the pointy bits at the end of the leaf stick out rather than sticking down. There are some differences between the two. So this is the common spotted orchid. Now, of course, I didn't get any leaves because the leaves were much further down into the vegetation, and I wasn't able to properly see them, and it was much easier just to take a photo of the flower itself. And you can see this beautiful veining and coloration on the lip of the flower, and they all look slightly different. We did see some yesterday that were slightly more pink and some that were slightly creamier or whiter color as well. And it's really the shape of the flower that gives it away, this coloration on the lip, but also the spotting on the leaves. So, you know, if you do see them, and they are, in Norbury Park, there were lots and lots of them. And if you look down into them amongst the vegetation, you'll see the spots on the leaves, and that'll be your dead giveaway. So it's not all about the flowers. This is a grass, and grasses shouldn't be dismissed. They are just as beautiful and attractive. They can be slightly trickier. They've got little different bits to look out for, such as complicated things called ligules, and that's the flappy bit of membrane that hides behind the leaf when it attaches itself to the stem. This one is called Coxfoot, Dactylis glomerata. And this one is fully out in flower. And in fact, yesterday we saw lots of them, and they were anything up to a metre tall. And they can be quite short and small. And you're very likely to have them in your garden. So if you're mowing, you never get to see them at this stage. But if you're doing what a lot of people have been doing, which is no mow May, or leaving an area of grassland uncut, you might be seeing this actually in flower at the moment. So this is it with all the dangly bits hanging out, all the bits of the pollen and the anthers and the stamens, and it's the inflorescence, the flowering section of it. If you sort of dangle it onto your hand and press it down, it comes out in sort of jointed bits, and it looks like a cock's foot, hence the name. That's where that comes from. So on to actually this one over here is slightly out of focus, so you'll have to look at this particular leaf and flower over here, and this is the same flower blown up, and this one is called, it's in the pea family, so you probably recognize it because it's got little 3 leaflets. It's not actually a clover, but it's a trefoil, which is part of the same family, and this one's called, well, actually it's not trefoil, sorry, it's a medic, and this one's called black medic. And you can tell that because right at the very end, the very tip of the leaves, it has a little point. And in order to remember that it's a medic, we say medics inject. There's that little pointy bit. Whereas the trefoils that I just mentioned don't have this pointy bit, but they can look very similar. And there are lots of little yellow trefoil-y type flowers. There's lesser trefoil, slender trefoil, hop trefoil, the list goes on. But if you remember that if you see the pointy bit, it's black medic. And the reason why it's called black medic is because, yes, it has yellow flowers, but come the later on in the summer, those flowers will turn into seed pods, and they're an incredibly black colour, where that name comes from. And the other thing that you can see in this picture here is just here, a little bit of yarrow. And that's yarrow is called Achillea millefolium. Millefolium is multiple leaves, many leaves, 1,000 leaves. And you can really see that if you sort of counted those individual little tiny leaflets that are coming off, there are quite a few of them. Another one in the pea family. This one you again will probably have in your garden, and it's called common bird's foot trefoil, so Lotus corniculatus, and it has lots of other names for it. And I was out yesterday, and other people were calling it eggs and bacon, or rhubarb and custard. And another name is old mother's claws, or mother-in-law's claws, or witch's claws, anything like that. And it's again, it's down to the not the flower itself, but the pod. So when the pod matures, it becomes black, and they do sort of come out like claws. And it's just amazing to see that, because by then the flowers have gone, so you don't have the flower to identify it, but you're seeing all these black seed pods in the grassland, and you can think to yourself, yes, that used to be the flower of the common bird's foot trefoil. And you can just about see in this picture here and also just here and here. You can just see that orange colour, and it can be a really burnt orange as well. Mostly they're yellow. When they first come out, there's this sort of orange, just gorgeous colour. And they can be quite patch forming. So you can see quite a sort of tussock almost of them. And sometimes you'll just see one or two coming through the grassland. And the other thing to say is that, yes, they have the 3 leaves. So you've got 1, 2, 3, but you've also got 2 little leaves at the back. And it's almost like, I always think it looks like a bit of a sort of a bird's claw. So you've got the claws at the front and the claws at the back as well. And this is, again, it's concentrated on this flower rather than looking at all of it, but the photograph is illustrating a common stitchwort. So, sorry, lesser stitchwort. So this is lesser stitchwort. It's often found in the grassland, and you can sometimes find it with greater stitchwort, but greater stitchwort is normally found on the edge of hedgerows and in woodlands, whereas this one is much more in open grassland. Both of them are quite delicate, weedy looking plants, particularly the lesser stitchwort, this one. And without the flower, it'd actually be quite difficult to identify it. It does have 2 little leaves either side, opposite to each other, and they look quite grass-like actually, so it would be quite difficult. But at this time of year, obviously now it is open, it is in flower. And you would think probably that it has 10 petals, but actually it does have 5. That is 1 there, but it's just incredibly deeply cut, but it is still just 1 petal. There are 5 overall. And then if we were looking at the greater stitchwort, it would be a bigger flower and a bigger plant, and the petals are bigger, and they're like little bunny ears. They stop there. So they're cut to about halfway, and they do look distinctly different. And at the weekend, I was surveying at Bentley Meadows in Hampshire. It's a butterfly conservation site, and they were actually nicely side by side, which is unusual. And so we were able to see the distinct differences between the two. Another plant that you can see in here, just going through down here and up here. There's another little bit here, and that's Hedge Bed Straw. Yesterday we were lucky enough to find Hedge Bed Straw, cleavers, which is the sticky willy, which is, I would imagine everyone knows, or goosegrass. And also we saw Lady's Bedstraw, which is coming out in flower now, often found in chalk grassland, but you can find it elsewhere as well. And that's one that has little yellow flowers, and Crosswort, which I will show a picture of later in the talk. So another one of the favourites, which is the common spotted orchid. And again, you can really see in this particular picture, there's 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so they were dotted around all over the place. And again, on this picture, you can see the coloration on that lip of the orchid. But you can also see another grass. And this one is called Poa trivialis. This one's called, in English, is rough stalked meadow grass or rough meadow grass. And it's a lovely little grass, and it can get quite tall. It can be quite shorter as well, depending on whether it's been mown. But it's very common, and it will probably be part in your garden, in your lawn. And again, another one that gets missed out really and doesn't get looked at particularly often. It has quite a long little flappy ligule, as I was explaining earlier, and it branches out, and it has little 3 branches right at the very bottom of the inflorescence. And that's another way of being able to identify it. Oh, yes, that was it. And the other thing here is clematis, wild clematis, which was running through all of the vegetation, particularly the taller vegetation. And that's another one that has lots of different names, with Traveller's Joy or Old Man's Beard. And the Old Man's Beard is relating to the fact that after it flowers and the seeds come out, they're incredibly hairy, and they just have this ball of fluff. And you can actually, when you're driving down lanes and roads later on in the season, you'll almost be able to identify it just from this sort of fluffy little balls of seed heads. And it does look like a beard. This one is a dog rose. So it's a beautiful flower, and it has massive thorns. And what you can't quite see actually at the back are the sepals. And this is where this particular poem comes from. I'm not going to read it out because I don't want to embarrass myself. I wouldn't say it properly. But actually, the gist of it in English is, on a summer's day, in sultry weather, 5 brethren were born together. 2 had beards and 2 had none, and the other 2 had but half a one. And if you have a look, when you're out and about next, have a look behind these petals, and you've got little green bits called the sepals. And on the sepals, you'll have 2 which have little whiskers coming out, little whiskery bits like a beard. One of them will have only one side of whiskers, and then 2 of them don't have any whiskers at all, completely clean. That's where that particular riddle or poem is coming from. So, yep, not all about plants, also flowers, it's grasses as well, and this is actually a sedge. So you've got sedges as well. So there is a way of remembering sedges have edges, rushes are round, and grasses are all the rest. So this sedge has a little inflorescence at the top. It's all sort of clustered at the top, and they're all male and female together. And this one is called spiked sedge or Carex spicata. And this one was right on the edge of a path, and it was this sort of great big tussock of stalks coming out. And if you put your finger over the stem of the stalk or the stem, it's 3-sided, it's triangular, and then the leaves come out in 3s as well. And that's how you can tell the sedge. So this one is called this flower here. Oops, sorry, this flower here. Again, it's not quite in focus, but some of these are. And they've got really sort of quite weak, floppy, I think, looking petals. It's the common rock rose, and it's very much a calcareous specialist. These leaves here are actually not from that particular plant. I'll explain about that one in a minute. The common rock rose, these are the leaves in here. They're quite discreet and small. It's really the flower that you're going to see most. And it's quite low to the ground. And when it's just about to come out, when it's still in bud, it has almost these sort of yellow and orange stripes on the bud itself, and then it opens out, and the orange stripes are actually underneath the part of the sepals. And yeah, a chalk specialist, but as I said, it's quite tricky. Some of these yellow species, these flowers, look like other ones. So again, it's coming down to looking at the rest of the plant as well and seeing which habitat you're in. But this is a nice one and can be seen in lots of chalk grasslands at the moment. So this particular species in here that's surrounding the common rock rose is the lady's bed straw. So with the other bedstraw, the leaves were, again, all the bedstraw species have got leaves that are in a ruff around the stem of the plant, and so is this one. But this one, it's much darker green, and it has very thin little leaves, and they're actually slightly recurved. They sort of curve back on each other to make them look even thinner, like little needles. But it's called lady's bed straw because it was used in pillows and mattresses in the days gone by in order to give it a nice smell, but it also has a particular chemical in there, which I think helps to repel fleas. This is a beautiful flower, again, a real chalk specialist, and it's very reminiscent, I think, of meadowsweet, and this one's called dropwort. So this one has these frothy, beautiful white flowers properly out in flower there. All these little anthers sticking out, making it look really, really long. They're really long, really frothy. And then you've got these little pink ones, and these are the flowers about to come out. So you can see in this particular picture over here, they're all about just waiting to come out in the next couple of days. So dropwort. The dropwort leaves, I haven't got a picture of that, unfortunately, although these are probably the leaves here. They look very similar to yarrow. They're very divided, but they're sort of divided in a much more neat way. Yarrow looks quite scruffy. It's quite sort of sticky-outy, where these sort of come off in little leaflets, and they're quite beautiful, just as the whole plant is really. And the other thing that you can see down here, just here and here. And again, we saw all of this, a lot of this throughout yesterday. And that is marjoram, or Margie to its friends. And this one has beautiful, almost hairy, just hairy leaves on the edge. And it has little dots, little glands, and that's where the smell is coming, that oil is coming through to give it that beautiful oregano smell. Right at the end of the walk, we had been seeing quite a lot of St. John's worts. So we had 3 on the walk. We had Perfect St. John's wort, which has a rounder stem. And when you look through, pick up one of the leaves and you look through it, you have to use a hand lens, or unless you've got really good eyes. And you can see little dots coming through, little translucent dots. That's Perfect St. John's wort. We also had another one which was Square Stalked St. John's wort, and it does have a square stem. But very similar looking. And then there was this one right at the very end, and I think you can just about see there's a little haze of hairs going along here. And this is hairy St. John's wort, and you often find this in chalk grassland. And then I've just blown up this picture here, this part of the picture here, and you can see all these little black glands all the way through on the edge of the sepals, and they are actually along the edge of the leaf as well. And then it's just little tiny, you can almost see there, little hair with a little gland on top. And it's just, again, one of those things that if you're walking by, you might miss it. But if you actually have a hand lens, and with hand lens, this one is just as cheap as chips hand lens. But I would advise, if you are going to buy yourself one, that you buy one with a light on there as well, because it just helps to, you know, if you're in a woodland, you can actually use that to see better all of the identification points. But it just brings it to life. Or of course you could do what I did, which is use a phone, take a photo and then blow it up, or use a magnifying glass on your phone as well. And another thing to say is that with the iPhones and the smartphones that you can get, you can buy apps which you can take the photo and it tells you what it thinks it might be. And obviously it has to be a good photo. It's not always correct, so it's not 100%, but it can help. I was at Maudling Hill, and last year, another chalk grassland, absolutely fabulous, near Winchester. And we were walking through and we were looking at this particular plant, and I had no idea what it was. And I was with another botanist, and we just simply had forgotten during lockdown what it was. And we didn't have any books on us, and we were pondering and looking and looking. We were there for about 5 minutes, and this chap came along and walked by, and he said, "Oh, I'm normally a birder, but I'm just switching to plants." He took a photo, looked at his app, and suddenly said, "Oh, clustered bellflower," and walked off. And we were there thinking, well, we've been outdone by an app on a phone. But, you know, if he got to the answer, it doesn't matter how you get to the answer. Even if you're looking through books or on the internet, there are lots of ways of identifying plants, and any way works. So this is the crosswort. So again, this is part of the bed straw family. And you can see it's a little ruff of leaves and the flowers all the way around. This one's actually quite hairy. And we found it, when you do find it, you do tend to find quite a patch formation of it, rather than individual plants. And it has these beautiful yellow flowers. And in this one, you can really see these beautiful hairs sticking out, and the individual 4 petals, yellow petals, and then the little ruff of leaves going around as well. And this one has quite a nice smell to it, quite almost a honey scent. Unfortunately, I've sneezed too many times in my life, having had hay fever all my life, so I can't always smell things, but apparently it smells pretty nice. Oh, and the other thing is here that you've got another species that's not quite out in flower, but one to look out for. Again, you can find it in chalk grassland and also neutral grassland. There are 2 species of it, but we tend to just call it as one. So this one's common or chalk napweed, but normally called common napweed. And as I said, this is a leaf. I like to think of it as a long, big nose, and that's how I remember it. And the stem at the moment is quite a sort of flushed purpley pink colour with a sort of a white downy colour of hairs going down the stem. but that is just about coming out into flower. And so we did find one patch of it, and obviously the sun was in it, maybe on it at the right time of the day, and also it had scrub around it. So I think it was just a little micro habitat, and it was just getting just the right enough sun in order to flower. And they're these bright, almost thistle-like purple flowers that come out. And this is a pyramidal orchid, and you really get a good sense of how it looks like a pyramid. This one is different from the spotted orchid, of course, because it doesn't have any coloration on that lip. It has these beautiful lobings, and then these side petals here, and then the hooded petal on the top. And that's how all orchids look, that sort of formation of the flower. And you can see as well that this one will open out from the bottom and then open out all the way to the top. It's not quite out in flower yet, but it's getting there. So this one was the most open one that I could find. And like with the common spotted orchid, that one opens a little bit earlier by a week or two. And then, as I said, this one will be out in full flower in the next couple of weeks. And it's a slightly different colour. So the common spotted orchid, apart from the leaves, obviously, this one doesn't have spots on the leaf, but the flower itself is just a little bit deeper pink. The common spotted orchid is just a bit more washed out, and this one is a real bubblegum pink, I think. And again, it's quite difficult to, sometimes they can be quite small. And when you see one, just be really careful. If you do want to have a look at it, just be careful to have a look around, because that one might be open a little bit more than others, and you might be actually stepping and treading on them as you go in. So just take care and have a look. And this is yellow rattle. So yellow rattle we saw yesterday. It has this sort of purpley bit like a beak at the top, and this yellow sort of inflated flower, and the sort of the inflated bit at the back rather. And this one, I think the leaves look a little bit like nettle, but they're much narrower, much more sort of neatly pointed. Has a square stem. And this is the one that people put into grassland in order to reduce the amount of grass growth that you have, because if you have a lot of grass and they're all coarse grasses, then you're going to not allow the flowers to flourish and to come through, because they won't be able to compete against all the coarse grasses. And because this one is parasitic, it'll actually tap into the grasses and use up some of their energy and their nutrients, and allow some of the other flowers to take hold. And this, we kept on finding these, and luckily we had the answer as to why we were seeing them, because we were going out. I went out with some of the volunteers who'd been doing them, and basically they had been. This is about, I don't know, about sort of 15 to 20 centimeters, and little areas of earth that had been dug out, and then the earth and the topsoil had been taken away, and it exposed the soil, and it's basically thinking like a rabbit. So basically you're sort of scrabbling away at the soil, and you're exposing some of that bare soil and some of this underlying seed underneath, and allowing things like the fairy flax and other species as well. There is thyme on the site, wild thyme, and things like that actually like having a little bit of bare soil, so they can get in there and they can flower, and they don't have the competition of the grasses and the other taller species around them. And so that's what hopefully this will do. And there were several, I mean, there were lots and lots. They'd obviously been out there for quite a long time doing this work and thinking like a rabbit. And they will be, I hope they'll be monitored, or at least people will go back to them in the next few years and see what happens, and see how they've been used by the plants. So that'd be interesting to see what happens. So we've come to the end of the talk, and that was the end of my walk from yesterday. I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I hope you've been able to learn a thing or two. The other thing that I would say is that there are lots of other books out there. I showed you some identification books, but there are some other books as well that are really useful to have a look at. This one is called The Modern Herbal, although I think it was in 1950s, written in the 1950s by a lady called Maeve Grieve, I think her name is, or Mrs. Grieve. And it's actually online, so you don't need to buy the book. It is actually online as well. And then one more book to let you know about, which is fabulous, Roy Vickery's Folk Flora. And again, if you're interested in any of the old names and the reasons why people used these particular plants for different things, medicinal purposes, then that's a really another nice book to get.